How many of you have been to the New York Botanical Garden? Okay, good. Most of us recognize the garden as a place to visit. And so we have about 750,000 visitors who come and enjoy the plants. But really, the reason I was introducing Dr. Morai and Carol Gracie is that we have the finest plant exploration program, I think, of any similar institution in the world. Our curators, our scientists, are lucky enough to spend much of their careers investigating the plant world. So, do you remember when you had to go out and collect leaves in the fall and iron them between wax papers? Yeah. So, Scott, Carol, and I are lucky enough to do that our whole careers. And to make a living doing that. We have about 150 people on the scientific staff, which include 40 graduate students, a number of adjunct affiliate people, 35 scientists, full-time scientists, and then a number of research assistants. And our people go all over the world and collect plants. So I'm an ethnobotanist. Ethnobotany is the study of the relationship between plants, people, and culture. Okay? And that's what we're going to talk about today. And really, the first person to coin the term ethnobotany was Professor John Harshberger of the University of Pennsylvania, who in 1895 got up at a meeting and said, "The study of plant uses by primitive people shall be called ethnobotany." Ethno for people, botany for plants. Now, back then, these people were considered primitive. But I would argue today that these people have a better understanding of life, of their bodies, of nature, of the interactions, of everything going around, all around them, than we do. That in a way, when it comes to nature, we are the primitives. And that these indigenous peoples who coexist with nature around the world are the sophisticates. And what I try to do is learn from them and try to then teach these lessons to students and people and policymakers, because unless we're going to be able to live in a sustainable world, we're not going to have this planet much longer. I'm specifically going to talk about a place in the world called Micronesia. Anybody heard of that or been there? Anybody been to Guam? No. Okay, so if you know your classics, Micronesia, small islands. Right? So it's a series of about 2,000 small islands in the Pacific. So it's like taking the state of Delaware and breaking it up in 2,000 pieces and scattering it across the continental United States. So most of it's water. Okay? And I'm talking today about 3 island nations where I work: Pohnpei, Koshrai, and the Republic of Palau, where I was last week. So why are these interesting to a person who is a conservationist? Well, 76% of the native plants that are found there grow nowhere else on Earth. And we have populations of plants, unique plants. Endemic means only found there, right? Endemic. The square footage of this building, let's say, there's a cinnamon tree that I'll talk about that's only found in this little tiny area. In the whole world, it's only there. So it's worthy of conservation. One of the 10 most significant hotspots on the planet. So that's 3 feet off the ocean. So you're living 3 feet off the ocean. So what are you exposed to? Sorry? Everything. Global change, right? So these are very precarious places, right? Now, I was out collecting plants on these islands last week. These are called the Rock Islands of Palau, and they're a World Heritage Site. They're little limestone formations. They're not volcanic. They were coral uplifts. And then unique plants have grown on them. There are about 500 of these. Next. And they are surrounded, this is coral. This is about 1.5 to 3 feet underwater. So they're surrounded by coral reefs, next, which support the most extraordinary diversity of marine life that you can imagine. This is called a frogfish. And you see it's sort of colored so that it can hide in that coral. Here are different species of coral. And I understand you have a marine program here, right? What a wonderful way to spend a career, sort of looking at things like this and discovering things, interactions, and preserving things like this. Next. And then, of course, if you're diving, there are hundreds of these. These are eagle rays, I think. Eagle rays. You know, they're about 8 feet across, and they're just sort of going through the water. Next. And then the rock islands, this is what they look like when you're sort of in the boat getting ready to try to climb one and collect plants. You see, there's a species of fish that eats the base of them. It's a parrotfish, and it actually eats through the coral. So some of these look like little mushrooms, actually. Next. And to get on them, you have to do what we call rough terrain botany. So you're actually climbing these things and collecting the plants. Next. Now, to me, one of the absolute wonders of the world is Jellyfish Lake in Palau. Jellyfish Lake. You see that these are the rock islands, and over time, about 12,000 years ago, these rock islands came together and enclosed a freshwater lake. Okay? Anybody seen a jellyfish before? What do you know about jellyfish? They do what? They sting, right? But do you think they're sort of beautiful the way they go through the water? You ever seen them swim? Right, next. So these are golden jellyfish by the millions. Next. And they have lost the ability to sting because there are no predators. Because this lake 12,000 years ago was surrounded by land, and the predators were excluded. So they, over evolutionary time, so actually evolution really exists, they lost the ability to sting. And all around you, 5,000, 10,000 jellyfish. And they're bumping against your head, they're bumping against your chest, your hands, and they don't sting. It's absolutely incredible, that feeling. I hope everyone in here will visit Palau and see this. So why is this important? Because of the marine life, because of the plant life, and we have a conservation program that's intergovernmental with all the Micronesia governments to preserve 30% of the nearshore marine resources and 20% of the terrestrial area by the year 2020, which is how long? We got 8 years left, right, to do this, and it's well underway. So that's the conservation piece of this. Next. Now I'd like to talk about devolution. As people modernize, it turns out they know less about living things and our relationship with them. Remember I said indigenous peoples are the sophisticates and we're the primitives. And this is why, when it comes to nature, sustainable living, and coexisting with the 8 billion people on the planet by now, something like that. Since these islands were colonized maybe 500 years ago, people took breadfruit. Anybody eaten breadfruit before? You chew it, and you get an enzyme in your mouth. It's a fruit from a tree that you can fry or mash, and it tastes sort of like a starchy potato. But if you process it in this way, wash it, put it in a pit, line it with banana leaves, chew some so that the enzymes in your mouth begin to sort of ferment the breadfruit, and then seal it up. It'll stay edible for up to 80 years. And therefore, if something happens to your food supply, you just go to the breadfruit pit, right? But what we found is that the college students I teach in the College of Micronesia in Pohnpei, none of them remember how to make one. So what does that tell us if something bad happens? Are they independent or dependent on someone to save them? Dependent. Right. And what happens if you're dependent and nobody shows up? Perish. Next. So that's what cataloging these skills and practices are really. We live in a post-industrial society here in Connecticut. Knowledge is compartmentalized. If one of your family's a doctor or a plumber or a banker, they're really good at that one thing. They have to be, right? That's what they know. But if you work on some of these places with indigenous people, it could be the Amazon, where Scott and Carol have worked, or French Guiana, or where I work. It's not compartmentalized. You talk to a single person and they'll know a lot about fishing and hunting and building houses and farming and weeding and cooking and healing people, because knowledge is not compartmentalized. Next. So, let me give you an example of the compartmentalization of knowledge. The philosopher Leonard Read tried to find a single individual in the United States of America who could describe how to make a wooden pencil and all of its parts, and failed to do so. The Economist philosopher. No one knows how to make a pencil from scratch. It turns out that the gum on the end comes from Southeast Asia, made by a special process. The brass comes from a mine somewhere else in Africa. The graphite isn't really graphite. It's a certain compound that comes from somewhere else. The wood usually comes from the United States. But no one knows how to make it from scratch. That is sort of the compartmentalization of knowledge. You need all those people all over the world to get the most simple of writing implements. All right, next. So, what do? We sit at the feet of elders, like your grandparents, like your parents, let's say. And here are the leaves, the plants, the specimens. And here's our little plant press, where we're pressing the plants. Remember I talked about the wax paper, right? So here we are in action. We're just sitting at the feet of a man named Llamas Rasa, who was in his 80s. And he was telling us everything that he wanted to share with future generations. We make what are called vivarium specimens, which are those pressed plants on a permanent paper. And at the Botanical Garden, we have a collection of over 7 million sheets of those plants from all over the world. So we can identify a lot of different things. So those are permanent records. Science has to be reproducible. And in the case of botany, the reproducibility is ensured by having a permanent record. What's the use of this? What do you mean? Okay, so you use it for cuts. How do you prepare it? How many leaves do you need? How long do you leave it on the cut? The interview goes on for an hour, maybe, for each plant. And then we preserve them and bring them back to the garden. We also do something called underwater ethnobotany, which this was the first time I was in a marine habitat and was able to do this. This is algae, and this one is one that sea turtles really like. So they use sea turtles as food, sort of like we eat chicken or cow or veal or goat. And so they collect this algae, tie it up, and they leave it. And then the turtles all come, and then they sort of lasso one underwater that they want to harvest. It's a very interesting, sustainable way of ensuring that that resource is around forever. And here's that cinnamon I was talking about. Cinnamon carolinense, only found in that small mountainside where they harvest it by scraping the bark. And they use it to treat back pain. Imagine how many of you have done the cinnamon challenge? You're nuts. So they make a tea of this and boil it up And for some reason, it's different from our cinnamon. You get rid of your back pain. So it's an important medicinal plant. Next. But here's the science. These people are extraordinary scientists. This bark contains a compound, here shown on a high-pressure liquid chromatograph, called safrole. And that promotes tumors. Okay? It's also in sassafras, which is why you're not allowed to make sassafras root beer anymore until you extract the safrole. So theoretically, all these people should be dead because, you know, this bark has a tumor promoter in it. But what we did was prepare the bark into the tea as they make it, and then we tested it, and look, it's missing that peak. It's gone. They figured out how to prepare it so that they get rid of the toxic compound. And you'll find this over and over and over again. People have learned to process things without equipment, by experimentation. They're incredibly sophisticated. They know how to take the cyanide out of things like cassava, tapioca, etc. So I thought that was fascinating. Next. We published that a couple years ago. Here's another one. You can tell by this name, Pseudo-Vanilla ponapensis, it's related to vanilla. Vanilla comes from an orchid native to Mexico and Central America. Here's one that's only found on that island that is very closely related. It's only found in a couple of small waterfalls. So that's why it's so important to preserve these things. Here's my favorite, and it's not a plant, it's a mushroom. Fungi are in a different category, classification, than higher plants, right? So this one is called Salam and Eni. How many speak Pohnpei? No one? Okay. Salam is ear, and Eni is ghost. So this is the ear of the ghost. And they use it for pain. You have pain on your elbow, you put some mushroom there, and gosh, you know, the pain goes away. But they also use it to sort of keep their little kids under control. They say that if you don't eat your food or you fight with your sister, we're going to take you out into the woods, into the forest, and Salang and Eni will get you. And why do they say that? Next. Because at night, this is what it looks like. This is the first photograph ever taken of the bioluminescent stage of this mushroom. So you're in this forest, next, and all around you are these lights. And in fact, if you're lost in the forest, the leader will take the mushroom and put it all over his or her body. And that's what I've tried to recreate here with Photoshop. And you can follow the leader. It's a fascinating mushroom. Next. But by far the most important plant is called kava, or sakal in their language. Anybody tried kava here? Yeah. Sorry? Yeah? Okay. So, next. This is a plant they grow in their agroforests. And these are modified forests. In the understory are these pepper plants. It's a pepper family plant related to the black pepper. But next, what they use are the roots. And they have biologically active compounds in the roots called kava-lactones. Okay, kava-lactones. Next. And here, the person is presenting the first cup to the king of this kingdom, because the highest ranking person always gets the first cup. And people drink it ritualistically. And some people drink it every day, some people drink it only in ceremonies. And what's interesting about it is that when you drink this, it suspends anxiety. Anybody ever been anxious about an exam? Yeah, well, you drink kava, and boy, that anxiety disappears. And we fed voles, prairie voles, this kava, and we found that it reduced their anxiety levels and certain characteristic social behaviors, reduced their aggression, for example. And voles are important laboratory animals because we understand their brains. And so understanding the mechanisms by which this plant works may provide important insights into human conditions involving social behavior, for example, autism, social anxiety, schizophrenia. If you walk into the Ministry of Health in Palau, you see the sign, Healthy Palau and a Healthful Environment. So their ministry will take positive action to attain a healthful environment, promote health and social welfare, protect family health and safety, provide healthcare services throughout the country. So it's a very different approach. It is a traditional approach. It is what healthcare used to be. Before, in the 1600s, it split off. The sort of wellness, holistic people split off, and the germ theory people went one direction, and the sort of holistic people went in another. So let's go to, in that island on the left-hand side of Palau, let's go to one of their health centers. They don't have private doctors in the country. You know, in the rural areas, you go to a health center. Next, and here's your dispensary, meaning here's where your pharmaceuticals are. So you see this? That's the limit of the medicines for the village. You know, it's like your medicine chest at home, like 6 things. But next. But if you go around back, they have gardens. They don't look like gardens. These are native plants that they manage, and they know what to do with them. Next. So one of the things the Palauans asked us to do was, why don't we take all of this oral knowledge that's in danger of disappearing and write it into a primary healthcare manual so that the community members can use it, the doctors can use it, and people can get better. No matter what they choose, they can choose a pharmaceutical if it's available, they can choose the leaves that grandmother raised them on. So you see, I don't know if you can read this, but these are the conditions. We're not talking about cancer. I don't believe that you can just, shake a stick over someone and their cancer will go away. We're not talking about that. We're talking about primary health care, things that often resolve. Skin fungus, bites and stings, gastrointestinal illness. Diarrhea kills between 4 and 5 million children a year around the world. And yet, the healthcare providers in many of these places don't know that the plants growing all over their areas can treat diarrhea. You lose the fluids from diarrhea, it leaks through the gut, and then your electrolytes go out of balance, and eventually you die. It's an illness that no one has to die from. And so things like this, the plants in that chapter are specifically for that condition. So what we've done, working with the healers and the Minister of Health and the physicians in Palau, is you have, and Pohnpei, you have the book, the manual, the patients here, the traditional healers who work in the hospital, and the doctors, nurses, medical students, to try and integrate this into the healthcare paradigm to make them more self-sufficient and sustainable. What did we say happens when you have no food on your little island? Right? You die, you starve to death. What happens when you have no prescription medications on your island? You sit there and go, well, I can diagnose diarrhea, but I can't treat it, so you're going to die. That doesn't have to happen anymore. And this model addresses that paradigm. Next. So, we also did a survey of people and how they live and their lifestyle, whether they live more traditionally, that is, doing some farming or use traditional medicines or go out fishing in a paddle boat where they get exercise, versus the people who work for the government and sit in front of terminals. So what does this mean for us? Anyone heard of Andrew Weil in this group? Okay, he was a disciple of Richard Evans Schultes, and he went to Harvard Medical School and developed something called integrative medicine, which is the intersection between traditional and alternative practices that have evidence behind them. Again, we're not talking about waving that stick over your head, but we're talking about something that's been clinically evaluated and combining that with allopathic medicine. So those of you, anybody want to go to medical school? Yeah. So 45 medical schools and major teaching institutions teach integrative medicine as part of their curriculum because somewhere between 40 and 50% of the American public use these modalities today. People are interested in this. And it's this combination of Western and traditional pre-industrialized society healing techniques. Thanks. Now, what do we do at the garden? What's the sort of model for our research? Well, it's really 3 activities on each island or in each country where the economic botany program is working. This is called a floristic checklist. You're making an inventory of what's there. You're asking the question, what plants are on the island? Or what plants are in this country? Or what plants are in this particular geographic region? And Scott and Carol have written probably the finest flora of any region in the tropics, perhaps the world, in the area they worked in French Guiana. How many years did it take you to do that? 11 years to answer the question, what's here and how do we describe it and how do we make a key so that everyone can determine what the species are that you might pick up and hold in your hand. So that's the first step. Second step is we write an ethnobotany book. But rather than the knowledge disappear when people pass on, it's all in a book. And the third step, these are 3 books, obviously. The primary healthcare manual that I've described for Palau, this is the one for Pointe. Next. So, what's going on in Pointe with forest cover? Back to conservation. 1975, this is the island. It's about 135 square miles. 43% of it was forest. 1995, 15%. 2002, 12%. That's a pretty high rate of deforestation, right? Habitat loss. Again, back to sustainability. If you know, and this is a watershed, you know what a watershed is, right? Where your water, the clouds fall, the rain falls from the clouds up in the mountains. This is the highest point in the center. And your water goes down the streams and you drink the water. If you have no more fresh water on your island and there's no well to be dug, again, what happens? No water. How long can you live with no water?
3 days.
A couple of days, right? So water becomes essential to sustainability and survivability. So medicine, food, water, elements of a sustainable lifestyle. So they're very concerned about that. So in some of these islands, we've helped them establish protected areas as part of the Micronesia challenge. So this tree, Terminalia, a very large tree, is only found in this area. So they made a protected area, a nature reserve, so it would not disappear. Next. This pandanus, again an endemic plant, only found in that area. Next is part of this nature preserve. So we help them make nature preserves in areas where the plants are so rare and important, or their function is crucial to survival on the island. Next. So, people say, how do you conserve? How do you preserve? And the answer I get everywhere, all around the world, it's really amazing. The same answer in China, the same answer in Micronesia, the same answer in the Amazon. You have to have self-respect first. So part of what we do is help build self-respect. as you know, it's not, don't aspire necessarily to a Western life. Respect yourself, and you have to respect the culture you're from. And only then can you really preserve the environment, that you build respect for the environment. And people tell me this over and over and over and over again, no matter where I go. How can we preserve this area? Well, we have to have self-respect, and we have to have respect for our cultural practices and our beliefs. We just can't adopt what you have in the United States and expect to continue to live here, be sustainable, and preserve our environment. It's just really, really difficult. Just other projects we do, and maybe sometime we could talk about internships. We study immigrant communities in New York City. There are 600,000 people from the Dominican Republic who live in New York City. And they go to Botanicals, which are herb stores, and they get a lot of their medical care from these botanicals in the same way that they used to get it in the Dominican Republic. So we're working with community organizations to understand what these plants are, what purpose they serve, what's efficacious, what's toxic, and very importantly, working with the medical students at Albert Einstein Medical College, at Columbia, Bronx VA, to teach medical students that if you're working with an immigrant population and they're talking about this plant or that plant, you can't roll your eyes. You have to understand that these plants are part of their culture, their identity, and you need to understand the plants. So we teach botany, we teach cultural sensitivity to the medical students at some of the top medical schools in the city. So, in closing, everyone knows what the biosphere is, right? That's our habitat. And few people know what the ethnosphere is, but it's just as it sounds. It's the sum total of human knowledge, ranging from Mozart's symphonies to how a Brazil nut gatherer knows when to gather the Brazil nuts and how to open the fruits to collect the nuts, to a person in Southeast Asia who uses a leaf to heal her child's stomach illness, or a person in the Pacific who knows how to preserve food for 80 years without refrigeration. That's the ethnosphere. And that information, that ethnosphere is as endangered as the biosphere. And so what we try to propose is something called biocultural conservation based on research. Okay? Biocultural research and conservation. Biology and culture. Next. And so, again, you know, everyone here is thinking about a career and the excitement of what they're going to be doing for the rest of their lives, whether they're 16 years old or 58 years old or whatever it is, you're always thinking about life. And I would submit to you that studies of natural history is really a fascinating trajectory for your career. And if you want to read more about this field, I gave Carly a little website where you can download a book that we wrote called Plants, People, and Culture on the Kindle or on the iPad or the Kindle app. It's just a general book on what ethnobotany is and the kind of work that we're doing. And what you've done is you're allowing me, by inviting me, to give voice to people like this who really don't have a voice in Western culture. You know, these elders, we don't know anything about them sitting here. And at least tonight you've heard a little bit of some of their stories and some of their wisdom and why it's so important that this be preserved and encouraged. So again, thank you for allowing me to come and give voice to people who have no voice in the Western world.
Is there a significant problem with introduced species in the Micronesian islands that you've been to?
Yes, invasive species, imagine you're living on a little tiny island. Invasive species often outcompete native plants. So they come in on the wheels of an airplane or a bird dropping, flying by, and they start to take over the island and crowd out the native vegetation. So these people are always looking to get rid of stuff, you know, so it doesn't take over their fields. Yes?
Are the younger generations interested in what their parents or grandparents are doing with plants?
Yeah, the purpose of the classes we teach there, including the environmental education classes, are to encourage people to interact with their grandparents before it's too late. So yes, they are fascinated. I'll tell you a story from Belize. Anybody been to Belize? Okay, so I worked in Belize for 15 years. And we did this same work in Belize. And I went back on an eco tour that I led for our board of directors from the Botanical Garden. And we were doing, we'd written the same books, similar books and all that. And the young man who was a tour guide, and there are hundreds and hundreds of people who make their living being tour guides in Belize, because 300,000 or 400,000 people come to that country every year for tourism. It's a big business there. And he found out my name. He said, you know, it's very interesting. My grandfather was a great healer and woodsman, and I just didn't learn anything from him. And my father, the same thing, and I was more interested in drinking soda out of cans and listening to American music, North American music. And he said, so in my job, the only knowledge I have that I can communicate to the tourists is from your books. In other words, these books you've written are my scholarly or economic Bibles, because these are the stories that he used to talk to the tourists. So all of a sudden, something we did 25 years ago is supporting a generation of young people who are greeting visitors and taking them off into the forest. So, you know, that's just one example of how young people appreciate this sort of thing because they get their income from it. You know? There's another question up there?
I have a quick question about, I'm so fascinated by the tea that you saw. We saw that the way they prepared it made it non-toxic.
Yes.
And it's fascinating because I can understand where they would realize by drinking a tea that had like cyanide in it, that's not good. But something that takes a long time to show up, like cancer. I'm interested to know, how do they know to prepare it in a different way to prevent that effect?
You tell me.
So is it something that happened over time and they learned how to prepare it?
Are they super intelligent, sensitive, and sophisticated?
That could be.
Must be. You know? Yeah.
With the marine Ethnobotany, did you just focus on algae or did you focus on other?
I just did a little bit of work underwater, and the plants that we only ask that they show us stuff they want to show us. There are no secrets, no secret formulas, family recipes. It's just general knowledge. And this is what he chose to show us, the algae. Yeah. You know, it's really interesting thinking about this. I have a friend who's probably in his 90s now, and he's a German guy, and he worked with the Warao Indians of the Amazon. His name was Professor Johannes Wilbur. And he went down there in the 1940s, and his thing was to study their dance. He would make these movies and diagrams and descriptions, and you walk to the left, you walk to the right, you know, and this is what he did at UCLA. You know, he was a specialist in this. And the kids and the people would say, what are you doing this for? Everybody knows this. You know, we all dance every day. What is the big deal about writing a scientific paper about our dance? 60 years later, he's contacted. Nobody in the village knows the dance anymore. can you come down to the Amazon and teach us our dance? This German scientist, a refugee from Nazi Germany, who settled in the United States and worked in the Amazon, is the only person in the world that knows the Wadao dances. And he teaches them to the children, the grandchildren of these people that taught him. Interesting, right? Really common stuff, but who knows where it's going. Yes?
How do you, if there's a pharmaceutical company that actually sees something that you've discovered, how do you make sure that any profits from it are actually getting back?
Yeah. So did everyone hear the question? If something's discovered from this of value in commercial pharmaceutical medicine, how do we guarantee that rights and benefits go back to those people? And actually, the Botanical Garden was one of the first institutions to develop and adopt a policy that ensured that any commercial results from any of its research would be shared with the people that provided that information. And we started that about 25 years ago, back in the 90s, late 80s, and we maintain that to today.
One other one. I mean, when you showed those 3 different time periods with the diminution of the forest, why is it? Is the population increasing, or is there more of a demand for products from the country?
That's a really interesting question. I didn't have time to put that in total context. On the island of Ponte, they're growing more and more cotton. And they were starting to grow it in the uplands because people would steal it because it's so valuable. So they would hide it in the uplands. You know, a 2-day hike up there to get your cotton. So the Nature Conservancy, you've all heard of the Nature Conservancy, right?
Yeah.
They do brilliant work around the world. They started a Grow Low campaign where they cut the rate of deforestation in half by growing the kava in the lowlands instead of cutting the unique tropical forest in the uplands. So the last data point there showed that forest conversion was cut from about 2.5% a year to about 1.25% a year because of the Nature Conservancies and the local partners Grow Low program. But it was all to grow cotton.
Well,
Yes.
with the breadfruit you were describing earlier, they chew it and then they spit it into the leaves?
Well, no, you take a little piece and you chew it, and you have an enzyme called ptyaline in the mouth, and that begins to ferment the rest of it.
Someone else will spit 60 years later.
You do, and in fact, there are many fermented beverages amongst native peoples where spit is the way you get it started. And unfortunately, when Carol Scott and I were spending a lot of time in the Amazon, hepatitis wasn't a problem. We could drink what's called chicha and other things made of cassava and peach palm, but now the students won't touch it because you can get hepatitis from drinking.
You have this vaccine.
Yes, there's a vaccine which unfortunately most of the world doesn't have access to or can't afford. Yeah. But yes, you can communicate illness through that. It's a different world.
Well, we want to thank you again for coming, Dr.